Okay, so this last part is really important. It sums up a lot of what we've been doing with the quadratic equations and stuff. I'm going to throw you a highlighter here. So we're looking at the forms of the quadratic functions and their significance.
You are a million feet off.
We've used several forms to represent our quadratic equations so far. Actually, we've used 3 of them, right? Standard form, vertex form, and factored form. They're all different forms for the same type of equation, meaning a quadratic equation where my highest exponent is a 2. I have an x squared, right? And they have different advantages for us, and we use them at different times. So we really need to know what are their advantages. Okay. First one, the standard form, is essentially I have everything expanded out. So an example of that is 2x squared plus 5x minus 7. What is the advantage of standard form? Number 1, it tells us whether our parabola is facing up or down. Okay? Brandon Burke. Called him in. Yeah. Okay, so there's number 1. It tells us if the parabola is facing up or down. Here's how we know. My a term is the coefficient in front of my x squared, right? If a is positive, then my parabola faces up. And if a is negative, my parabola faces down. Cool. So there's one thing that form does for us. The second advantage of this form is that it allows us to use the quadratic formula to solve that equation. Okay, it allows us to use that quadratic formula. Remember, this is the quadratic formula up here. Ben, I need you in your seat, bud. I know this has been a long session, but this is really important stuff right now. So can you be in your seat taking your notes if you want to get that check mark? All right, bud?
28 minutes left. I appreciate the points update, dude.
All right, so the second type of form, that was standard form. Our second type of form is vertex form. Here is our generic vertex form, and here is a real example. So if you guys remember, this is the one that shows us all the transformations that happen to the graph, and we can use vertex form to graph by hand really easily. This is the one we worked on yesterday, where you can identify the transformations from the parent graph and then go ahead and graph it. So our big advantage here is that it shows us the vertex. And the transformations. All right, remember that if this is my standard version of the form, that my vertex is going to be at the point negative hk. And this should actually be a plus. This should be a plus k right there. You guys can change that. So that's form number 2 is our vertex form. So we've talked about standard form, vertex form. Our last form is called factored form. And that is where I factor my quadratic function into 2 binomial factors. Here's binomial factor number 1, 2x plus 7. Here's binomial factor number 2, x minus 1. So what are the advantages of that form? That allows us to use that zero product property to solve that quadratic equation. How about we just say to solve it? All right, and what does that mean? That means I look at my factors and I set each factor equal to 0. So I say, what would make this factor all be equal to 0? Well, if I had a negative 3.5, it would make that equal to 0. So that's one of my solutions. Then I look at the other factor, I say, what would make this factor equal to 0? Well, if x was a positive 1, that would make that factor equal to 0. So those are my two solutions right there.